She thought her badge made her untouchable, the self-appointed guardian of perfection. But the moment she stepped through my door with that stolen key, her empire of control began to crumble. The floorboards creaked beneath Karen Hale's designer loafers as she crept inside my living room, clutching a brass key that shimmered in the fading afternoon light. Her phone was raised like a weapon, snapping photos of my furniture. Proof, she thought, of crimes against community standards. She didn't know 2 officers were already waiting in the hallway, silent as shadows. When they stepped forward, their badges glinting under the same light that touched her stolen key, Karen froze. A picture of arrogance collapsing into fear. That was the day my nightmare finally ended. My name is Marcus Lee, and 3 months after my divorce, I moved into Birchwood Estates, a place that seemed like peace incarnate. Manicured lawns, white fences, smiling neighbors. I thought it was exactly what I needed, a quiet reset. Then I met Karen Hale, president of the Homeowners Association and self-declared keeper of order. She introduced herself like a queen greeting a subject, clipboard in hand, polite smile so tight it could cut glass. My first offense? Curtains. Not ugly ones, just visible. She told me the HOA required aesthetic continuity from all public vantage points. In other words, my interior design offended her line of sight. I laughed, thought it was a joke. Then she handed me a printed citation. The next weeks felt like a slow invasion. Every few days, another envelope. Mailbox shade non-compliant. Garden hose orientation improper. Recycling bin misaligned by 3 degrees. I began to suspect she was inventing new rules between yoga classes. Soon, I started closing my blinds just to avoid her gaze. Then came another letter. Windows too frequently covered, creating an unwelcoming facade. She turned my privacy into a violation. At HOA meetings, she bragged about cooperative homeowners who allowed her to inspect interiors. She said it so casually, like she was doing them a favor. When I politely declined her offer to tour my home, she blinked, confused. It was the first time I realized that someone had told her no. From that moment, her visits grew more frequent and more aggressive. She'd show up claiming anonymous complaints, odors, noises, suspicious activity, always with that badge, that practiced tone of authority. And always the same demand: I'll need to step inside to verify compliance. I refused every time, and that's when I started noticing things. A flower pot moved half an inch, footprints in the mulch too large to be mine. Then, one night after a business trip, muddy prints from my front door to the hallway. That's when I realized this wasn't just harassment anymore. This was invasion. Detective Janet Morales listened without judgment. She examined the stack of citations, each one more absurd than the last, and said quietly, "If she really entered your home, we'll catch her." We set the trap. Hidden cameras in every major room. 2 officers stationed inside during the hours I was usually away. The plan was simple: bait her with routine. I'd take my evening walk with Bailey, my golden retriever, right on schedule. Anyone watching would think the coast was clear. At 6:47 p.m., Karen approached, calm, deliberate, checking the street before producing a small brass key. She slipped it into the lock like she'd done it before, and she had. The footage showed everything. Karen walked in like she owned the place, straight to the living room, muttering about decor violations. She photographed my bookshelf, complaining about inappropriate titles, then my coffee table, too close to the rug, apparently. That's when Officer Morales cleared her throat. "Ma'am, would you mind explaining what you're doing in this residence?" Karen spun around, face pale. She tried to recover, waving her badge like it was a warrant. "This is an official HOA inspection," she said. "I have full authority to ensure compliance." Officer Thompson replied evenly, "You don't have permission from the homeowner, do you?" Karen's voice wobbled. "I don't need permission. I'm protecting property values." When Gonzalez informed her that HOA rules were civil, not criminal, the color drained from her face. She tried to bolt, but the officers were faster. When they told her she was being detained for unlawful entry and trespassing, she melted down, dialing her husband on speakerphone, crying about false imprisonment and abuse of authority. Her husband's outrage evaporated when the officers explained what they'd seen. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Then came the click of handcuffs, crisp, final. Neighbors lined the sidewalks as the patrol car pulled away. Karen, the woman who'd once written weekly newsletters about community values, was now the talk of Birchwood Estates. Phones recorded everything. Some clapped. Some stared in disbelief. Even as she was led away, she shouted about violations of her rights, completely blind to the irony. At the station, she refused fingerprinting. "The ink will ruin my manicure," and demanded a private cell because she was not like the others. The duty sergeant processed her without a word. When she finally got her phone call, she didn't ring a lawyer. She called City Hall to file a complaint about them. By morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Karen Hale, the self-crowned queen of Birchwood Estates, had fallen. An emergency HOA meeting drew record attendance. Former victims stepped forward, voices trembling as they described years of intimidation, fines, even secret home entries. The board voted unanimously to remove her. Within a week, a new rule passed. All spare HOA keys destroyed or returned to homeowners. But the revelations didn't stop there. Investigators found dozens of photos, residents' living rooms, bedrooms, private papers, stored neatly on her laptop. Each file named, categorized, and ranked by what she called risk level. Mine was marked high risk. She'd written notes about my divorce, my work hours, even guesses about my income. Detective Morales testified it went beyond harassment. It was organized surveillance. During her hearing, Karen stood rigid as the judge read the charges. Her attorney pleaded for leniency, calling it misguided civic enthusiasm. The judge didn't buy it. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and $10,000 in fines. But the true ending came when Karen, against her lawyer's advice, insisted on speaking. For nearly an hour, she lectured the courtroom about the importance of community standards, claiming she had improved property values and that residents like me were diluting the neighborhood's character. Then came the prosecutor's question. "Do you believe you have the right to enter any home within your HOA?" Karen didn't hesitate. "Yes." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, voice calm but cold. "Mrs. Hale, that belief is exactly why you're here." Her face went pale. For the first time, she seemed to understand. Life in Birchwood Estates eventually quieted down. People started waving again, smiling again. And every time I pass the empty house where Karen used to live, I think about how power, left unchecked, can rot the soul. In the end, it wasn't my fight that brought her down. It was her own reflection in the mirror of accountability. She wanted control. She got consequences. And that's a story this neighborhood will never forget.